Hello, this will be a presentation on Canadian English history and development by Richard Holman. It is important to emphasize that Standard English, as manifested in its two main varieties, is not threatened by all these regional developments that could hardly be given that the vast majority of the world's printed English output is in either the British or American Standard. Every few decades, someone predicts that British and American English are one day going to become mutually unintelligible, but there is little sign of this happening. David Crystal. This quotation is an important part of this presentation because although British and American English have significantly influenced Canadian English throughout history, Canadian English has also developed its own little nuances and differences, both culturally and historically. This presentation also hopes to compare and contrast the differences between British American English and other languages to Canadian English. In order for us to understand Canadian English better, we have to understand the geographical layout of Canada. Canada is a vast but sparse in population. According to Golden McAlpine, Canada has the same population as South Africa. The United Kingdom has twice the population of Canada, and the United States, which is comparable in size, has 8 times the population of Canada. So why is there little variation between Canadian English and American English? This is because the population of Canada is primarily located on the southern border. As a result, Canadian English has become significantly influenced by American culture and language. Quebec's location interrupts the continuity of the English language majority, splitting the Atlantic provinces from the central and western provinces, and perpetuates bilingual buffer zones in the adjacent provinces. So an important part of Canadian English development is understanding the colonization of the nation we know as Canada today, because Canada's maritime provinces, including Quebec, were primarily settled by the French during the 1600s. And essentially, this actually created a split between the western side of Canada and the eastern side of Canada, which later developed into speaking Canadian English as we know it today. And this happened because England was sending thousands of settlers to the New World to immigrate, and the French were only sending about a few hundred a year. So this drastically influenced Canadian English to become the primary language rather than French. Moreover, the Canadian natives often fought alongside the British, usually against the French. Furthermore, English settlers were often literate according to 18th century documentation. French is still an important topic when discussing the development of Canadian English, as French has continued to remain an influence throughout the country because about 5 million Canadians in Quebec still speak French today, but only about 572,000 Canadians who are in Quebec can speak English, whereas the entire Canadian population of 17.5 million speak English today. Unlike Quebec, though, where French is the primary language, French accents have become mixed in with English, uh, especially near regions such as Quebec and Eastern Ontario, due to the large population of French speakers. For example, even outside of Quebec, English-speaking Canadians sometimes refer to place and street names by their French equivalents rather than their English ones. Another important part of the Canadian English development is the British's influence on the country. British immigrants began to influence Canadian English accents and dialects in the 19th century, particularly in Ottawa and Peterborough and Nova Scotia, as the founding population of the areas. Furthermore, British immigrants attempted to change English practices in Canada, wherein school teachers changed spellings such as color, neighbor, and meter from their American-influenced equivalents, which we will explain later why the Americans influenced Canadian English before the British did. Likewise, southern Canadian colonies were widely populated and influenced by England, that Canadian English adopted terms such as lorry for truck, bonnet for car hood, and boot for trunk. The primary reason for this is because Canada was the District of Columbia for many years until recent history. But what about the First Nation Indigenous Canadian languages? Jessica Ball estimates 50 different First Nation languages under 11 major language families are still in use today in Canada. First Nation English dialects likely developed as a lingua francas, following contact between English and Indigenous populations. As such, First Nation communication with colonists likely developed as a pidgin and later evolved into Creole. Therefore, First Nation English speakers have developed distinctive features through cultural patterns and syntax. For example, Cheyenne English speakers replace English consonants not found in Cheyenne and vice versa. Furthermore, linguists have discovered Native American English speakers use an unmarked past tense which is morphological and syntactic deletion of multiple negation, according to Jessica Ball. However, these features are general in nature and other English dialect features differ greatly between communities. Likewise, features in Native American English dialects have been decreasing in recent years due to modernization and pressures in the usage of standard English dialects. One of those popular features known in the Canadian English is the use of A. The interpretation of A fits well with Canadians' general conception of themselves as a rather cautious, rather retiring, but basically good-hearted nation. We are not afraid to form and express our own point of view, we just don't like to force it too much on other people. Canadians will argue that the use of A is not strictly a Canadian feature of the English language, but rather utilized as a feature developed from British English. However, A is more commonly used in Canada than in any other region around the world, as a respectful and friendly means for agreement during a question and when asking an individual to repeat themselves. In fact, Gold and McAlpine estimate about 88% of Canadians use A as a rhetorical question. Canadian English differs from most British and American dialects in the pronunciation of two diphthongs. In fact, the two variations can be seen as one systematic sound rule. A diphthong is the blending of two different vowels into one syllabic unit so that the native speaker hears one vowel sound. Examples are the OU sound in house and how, the OY sound of boy and toil, and the AY of die and tile. Gold and Alpine. The most distinctive difference between American English and Canadian English is the low back vowel, such as with daughter and daughter, and sorry and sorry. Linguists have tracked this vowel usage in Canadian English since approximately 1850. Interestingly, this feature has merged into many Midwestern states, such as Wisconsin and Minnesota. However, others would argue there is an extensive shift in the use of the low back vowel across Canada in recent history. Although these sneaky vowels might jeopardize the sound of Canada's iconic lingo, they are helping unite us since the same change is happening in Red Deer as it is in Montreal. We may find decreasing distinction between accents. Jessica Campbell. Meanwhile, the shift is distinguishing Canada even more to the U.S., where an estimated 34 million people around the Great Lakes region are showing a change called the Northern Cities vowel shift. Jessica Campbell has also noticed a significant shift in the Canadian vowel stress, where the younger generation adopted the shift from California as a means to portray a trendy identity. In recent years, this shift has been adopted by Canadians, old and young, most likely due to popular films and social media in an attempt to adapt. Campbell also suggests Canadians are tolerant of different English language variations and therefore have accepted the shift. And this picture here represents the vowel shift that has taken place in Canada in recent history. Some of the American variants that are increasing in Canada are also increasing in American regions as well. In the replacement of divided by the dove, for instance, young Canadians are adopting the form that is used by Americans across the border from Canada in New York State. Canadians often learn from American textbooks, read American novels and periodicals, listen to American radio programs, and watch American TV and movies. Gold and Alpine. Although Canadian English contains many different features to American English, there are also a variety of similarities between the language. For instance, many American features distinctive to Canadian English developed through refugees of the American Revolution. As such, refugees and immigrants from America made up the founding population of inland Canada, bringing dialects similar to those from New England, Virginia, and Georgia. Similarly to American English, place names and indigenous plants and animals retained their native names such as Toronto, Ottawa, tobacco, and beaver. Likewise, American English has come to naturally influence Canadian English through newspapers and other media. This is due to human nature, where society will adapt to essentially fit in when it is perceived to be different. However, as Canada continues to adapt to American English, it still retains British patterns and spellings. As a result, Canadian dictionaries contain spelling features for both American and British words, wherein both are considered correct among the Canadian populace. While different from both British and American English, is in large measure a blend of both varieties, and to this blend must be added many features which are typically Canadian. Golden Alpine 56. So in conclusion, Canadian English contains many influences from other nations and regions due to a variety of cultural, political, and historical factors. However, just as American English and British English contain their own nuances and differences, so does Canadian English. Therefore, just as David Crystal stated, it does not appear these variances in English will fade into history anytime soon. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Here are the works cited for my presentation. Thank you.